A symptom, a disease, or a syndrome. All different words with different impact. And it's actually good to know the difference because that allows you to empower the client and to reduce their fear. So let's take a look at the meaning of the words and how you can start decomposing the elements of it. So let's take a look at some of the definitions. We're going to take a look at the definition of symptom, of a disease or an illness, a syndrome, and a complaint. So first, let's start off with the definition of a symptom. According to the dictionary, it's a subjective experience or evidence of a disease or physical disturbance, something that indicates the presence of a bodily disorder. A very evident reaction, for example, to a pathogen, pathogen is something that's supposed to create a disease, and something that indicates the existence of something else, symptoms of an inner turmoil. So now let's have some examples or a slight indication. Let's have some examples of a symptom, which actually is a single element. For example, the redness of the skin. You can see that, you can observe that, you can measure that. Itchiness of the skin. You can kind of see that because it's irritating, but the client can definitely notice it. It's not measurable, but the client can definitely notice it when it's there and when it's not there. A dry skin, you can see that, you can measure that, you can feel that. Bumps on the skin is also something that a client can see and you can observe at the same time. Coughing, you can hear that. The client notices it. Sneezing, same thing. You can hear that, you can see that, and the clients notice it. The common denominator in this is that you can actually observe it, measure it, and be sure when it's there or when it's not there. Whether a symptom is there or not there is quite an important distinction we get a little bit later on. So let's take a look at the definition of a disease or an illness. It's a condition of a living animal or plant body or one of its parts that impairs normal functioning and is typically manifested by distinguishing signs and symptoms. Typically, not always, but the definition revolves around it impairs normal functioning and it might be manifested by recognizable signs and symptoms. Let's take a few examples of a disease or an illness. Asthma is a disease or an illness. Cancer, chickenpox, cold, eczema, and a headache. Notice the difference between the symptoms. It's less clearly identifiable, right? Asthma, what you notice is the asthma attack. But people have asthma, but don't always have the attack. Cancer can be diagnosed, but it could be there before it's diagnosable. Chickenpox could be noticeable, could be not noticeable, same as a cold. Eczema has many different forms that it can show up on the skin. A headache is kind of noticeable, but it's definitely not measurable. A complaint is something that is really subjective and the person complains about it, right? For example, you can feel a lack of energy, you can feel pain. However, if science cannot find the cause, then the patient is, by definition, not sick. Isn't that weird? They can have situations which impair their normal functioning, but just because the science cannot find why it's causing that, then they're kind of ignoring it. If you don't know what happened, then it's not there. It's almost like ignoring that there's gravity before people knew the laws of gravity. No, the apple doesn't fall downwards because we have not proven it yet. So most of the diseases are classified according to recognizable symptoms. So if you have a certain set of symptoms that fit in a group, then it's called a certain disease, although the cause might be totally different. I really like the definition of a disease by a guy called Furchal. Disease results when the natural body processes occur at the wrong times and places. I like this definition. I don't like the word wrong though, because wrong is a value judgment and assuming that the body makes mistakes. And I don't believe that. I like to call this disease results when natural body processes occurs at inconvenient times and places. And what I really like about this definition is that it's the natural bodily processes. So the other thing that we need to take a look at is set of symptoms, or something called a syndrome. A syndrome is a collectively set of symptoms grouped together to create a new name. So a group of signs and symptoms that occur together and characterize a particular abnormality or condition. Even though this is one of the official definitions, they don't have to actually occur together. Because only if even if they sometimes occur together, they are still called a syndrome. So let's take a look at the allergic reaction symptoms. An allergic reaction is kind of a syndrome. You could be sneezing, you could feel like it's itchy, you could be itching, you could have redness in the eyes, you could have some coughing, you could have some wheezing or some other symptoms. A typical allergic reaction does not have to cover all the elements, doesn't have to show all the symptoms. If you put like 10 people next to each other who have a defined or you have diagnosed an allergic reaction, one might have sneezing and itching, the other one might have sneezing and redness, and the third one might have itching, coughing, and wheezing. So the symptoms that a person perceives is different. And this brings me to a very important point revolving around syndromes, like an allergic reaction. Assume somebody comes into your office and he presents himself with the problem or the complaint, I have an allergic reaction to X. Doesn't matter what. To sun, to food, to plants, to dust, to animals, doesn't care, doesn't matter. How would you treat this person? How would you go about in finding the evidence? Because there's no single cause of a so-called allergic symptom. There is no allergic symptom. There's the sneezing, there's the itching, there's the redness, there's the coughing, there's the wheezing, and some other symptoms. You can find the evidence behind each and every one of them, but there's no evidence behind an allergic reaction as such. So what is important to do is when a client comes into your office with something that is a syndrome that might consist of many different symptoms, ask the client what are their symptoms. It's good to know the diagnosis just as a backup, and you need to know what the client is experiencing. Because if the client is experiencing sneezing and itching, you don't have to take a look at the traditional allergic redness of the eyes, because it's not something the client experiences, even though it's in the definition of an allergic reaction. So only work on the actual symptoms that the client is experiencing. So a great question to ask is what symptoms do you experience and how do you know you still have it? This kind of, if you're a little bit familiar with NLP, this kind of denormalizes the process of disease into individual symptoms. It reduces the seriousness of the hopelessness of the entire situation, and it breaks it down into more manageable chunks. Manageable chunks that you actually can measure and work on in your treatment. The other thing which is really important, how do you know you still have it? How do you know you have it, or how do you know you still have it? Like redness of the skin is easy. How do you know you have it? I see it, right? How do you know you're sneezing? Achoo! I notice it. But when you did a blood test half a year ago or 4 years ago, and they noticed a high level of cholesterol, how do you know you still have it? You can start working on high blood pressure, but how do you know it's still there? And that is actually kind of a magic trap that people are in, is once they have a certain diagnosis, you have high blood pressure, for example, they believe they will still have it for many years, even though it hasn't been measured. So it's good to just be aware of that and ask the question, how do you know you still have it? That releases the client of a lot of stress.
Do you want more content like this? Let me know what you would like to see. What would you like to hear? What topics would you like me to discuss? Make a comment what you would like to hear.